Hi guys, welcome to my second video in regards to body immunity. We discussed about, in the first video, we discussed about what immunity is. We discussed about, what can lower your body immunity and the type of responses that happen in your body, including, primary, secondary, and tertiary. We basically want to progress. Just to mention, we also have active immunity and passive immunity. So there are some situations whereby your body is not already sensitized to a specific antigen. When we speak about antigen, we are talking about that bacteria, that virus, that foreign agent that gains entry into your body, that affects your body. When you speak about antibodies, they are the secretions that your body produces to fight the antigen. So there are for some condition, your body can be sensitized to fight a subsequent infection. For example, when it comes to TB, you are vaccinated against TB. So it means when we have the microbacteria gaining entry subsequently after immunization, then your body that is already sensitized will fight the bacteria, and you may never know that you are exposed to the TB bacteria. So that is what we call passive immunity. But active immunity is your body is not sensitized. It happens now and now, like repeatedly. So there are some microorganisms which your body cannot keep a record of the infection, so that subsequently, if the infection or the infectious agent gains entry into your body, it fights it. So when you hear of some disease conditions where we do not have vaccination, that might be the reason, because the body does not, there is no way we can come up with a way your body can be sensitized to keep antibodies, store antibodies for a long time, so that subsequent exposures, you are free from the infection or free from invasion, development of an infection. Now we have to talk about the other two categories of immunity. Remember, I've just spoken about passive and active, but we have this what we call humoral immunity, very, very, very important, and we have what we call cell-mediated immunity. Now, humoral immunity is mediated by antibodies, while cell-mediated immunity is facilitated by cells. But before I get into that, I have to go through body cells so that we can understand. Now, the organs of the immune system, there are a number. I've mentioned a few of them. But we shall start with the we shall mention again the very, very most critical ones. So you have the thymus gland. The thymus gland is a gland that is found, within your mediastinum. This space inside your chest where we have the heart and the lung. That's what we call the mediastinum. So just above the heart, over it, we have what we call the thymus gland. And the thymus gland exists from birth and then disappears with time. So this thymus gland has a lot of functions. For example, T cells cannot mature within the bone marrow. So they have to be transferred to the thymus gland, mature there before they can be actually utilized. Now, another organ is the liver. Some medical literature will actually not consider the liver as part of the immune system, but for me I will, whether direct or indirectly, because the liver has so many functions, including even some other functions to do with more bone marrow, the manufacturing of those blood cells from the bone marrow, including supporting the skin to perform its immunological functions, including even storage of some, like cells, like mast cells. So the liver is another organ. Then we have the lymphatic system, which maybe I can break it down. So you have the lymph nodes, you have the tonsils, you have the adenoids, you have the lymph vessels. All those are also organs of the immune system. And you have very, very, very important, the bone marrow. That is where I was going, the bone marrow. So the bone marrow, but the bone has the bone marrow within it, and this one is a very, very important organ when it comes to hemopoiesis, when it comes to the manufacture of blood cells. Now, bone marrow manufactures generally three types of blood cells, and those are platelets, which help in blood clotting, red blood cells, which are responsible for carrying hemoglobin, which is responsible for distribution of oxygen and removal of carbon dioxide from the body. Then you have the white blood cells, which is very critical when it comes to body immunity. So the white blood cell category of blood cells has a lot of functions when it comes to immunity. Actually, cell-mediated immunity is almost totally about white blood cells. So to begin with, white blood cells are manufactured in the bone marrow. Some of them may mature outside the bone marrow, and there is a number of white blood cells that respond to different foreign agents, different infectious agents that gain entry into your body. So we have around 7 types of white blood cells. We have the lymphocytes. So this is a very important category of white blood cells. And then we have the monocytes. So both the lymphocytes and monocytes, they are called mononuclear cells. And then we have the neutrophils, we have the basophils, we have the eosinophils, we have mast cells, and you have other forms of cells. So the neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils, they are considered as polymorphonuclear cells. Poly means more than one, and mono means one, so it means polymorphonuclear. Morpho is about morphology, the shape. Nuclear, it is the nuclear, the normal organelle of the cell. So that can tell you the difference between the structure of the polymorphonuclear cells and the structure of the mononuclear cells. Now, to begin with, neutrophils are responsible for fighting especially bacterial infections. Acute infections. In acute infection, you'll always find elevated neutrophils. When you do that thing, you have always been hearing about full blood count, full blood count. You go to a facility, you're sick, a doctor gets some blood and takes to the laboratory and brings some form where you see some funny writings, WBC, HGB, HCT, all those. So those are elements of blood cells being assessed. So neutrophil will be elevated in bacterial infections, and lymphocytes will be elevated especially in viral infections. That's why in HIV you get elevated lymphocytes. Then monocytes, like for example basophils and eosinophils, they too allergic reactions like asthma or any allergy, maybe allergic response to maybe a drug, they'll be elevated. They'll also be elevated in parasitic infections. So all these, they have, they respond specifically to certain forms of foreign agent that gains entry into your body. But I'm not going to concentrate on all of them. I just want us to concentrate so much on lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are the center of body immunity. Very, very important. We cannot progress without discussing lymphocytes. So, what do lymphocytes do? Now, we have 3 types of lymphocytes to begin with. We have T lymphocytes, and you have B lymphocytes, and you have what we call natural killer cells. If you want, before I continue, remember natural killer cells. So you have to start thinking, what do they kill? They kill actually abnormal cells like cancer cells, especially cancer cells, natural killer cells. But the three of them have coordinated function. There is a way a reduction in T cells will affect the functioning of B cells and may even affect the function of natural killer cells, and we are going to see that. So how is all this process of T lymphocytes coordinated? So what happens is T cells or T cells, we have a type of T cell that we call T helper cells. So T helper cells stimulates B cells. B cells is the one that is responsible for producing antibodies. Of course, which we said antibodies, they're the ones that are responsible for your kind of response to, like your body is able to be sensitized to a certain infection, so that subsequent infection it will just respond because the antibodies are already there. So this immunological specific subsection, subgroup of immunological system that fights foreign agent by producing antibodies. Antibodies, remember antibodies are chemicals. That is what we call humoral immunity. And that is the function of B cells. But for T cells, they, apart from being assisting even B cells, T cells themselves, they, they directly damage. They are most responsible for cell-mediated immunity. I don't know how to put it. So we have T cells, B cells, and you have cytotoxic T cells. So cytotoxic T cells is very easy. They're also stimulated by T helper cells, and then they actually work on abnormal cells. They kill abnormal cells, especially cancerous cells. B cells, they produce antibodies that fight the cell. You get the point? And all these are supported by the T cells. They come from a chain of T cells, as we may see that to continue. Now, one of the things I want to mention clearly is, what are these conditions, disease conditions that have immunological importance? What are these disease conditions that are associated with immunity, abnormal immunity? So we have what we call autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases are diseases that whereby your own body defense mechanism fights itself. Usually your antigens that have been stored after an initial infection, or that are formed during an existing infections, fight your own body because of molecular mimicry. There is some molecular resemblance between the bacteria and your body cell, a specific type of body tissue or body cell, and therefore your body starts fighting that cell, thinking it is the foreign agent, the bacteria. So those are what we call autoimmune diseases. For example, I mentioned to you acute glomerulonephritis. Another one is rheumatoid arthritis. There are so many autoimmune diseases, including those that may cause hemolysis in a newborn. Newborn is born, and then, or a mother gets pregnant, and the fetus get destroyed. Once start forming blood, and the blood of that fetus just get destroyed. And then you have allergies. Allergies is another condition, immunological condition, and allergies sometimes we call hypersensitivity, because your body is sensitive, but too sensitive to the allergy that it start damaging its own cells. So you may have an allergy to a drug, and certain form of medicine, and start maybe having hives, you start having breathing difficulties. Some get very severe conditions, including even inflammation of the brain. So that's what we call, that's part of immunological condition. Then, of course, we have immune deficiency. So your immunity is low. So you have immune deficiency conditions that are related with immune deficiency. They lower your immunity, and those are very, very, very important conditions. For example, common, again, HIV/AIDS, cancer. Now, For autoimmune disorders, I think I mentioned a number. I mentioned there's something called systemic lupus erythematosus. One time I saw on TV, Kenyan TV, a lady who was diagnosed of SLE, what we call systemic lupus erythematosus. And it's very unfortunate. It's a very debilitating condition because it can become, just affect every system in your body, multisystemic disorder. We have something called Graves' disease. We have what we call um, type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, which I mentioned earlier. Now, other immunological problems that may occur include ABO incompatibility, blood group incompatibility. That's why your blood is tested before you donate to somebody or before you receive blood from an external source, because not every blood is compatible with, the recipient's blood. So we have to make sure in healthcare facilities that there is compatibility has been established. So all those blood groups, A, O, A, B, they have to be established that they are compatible. And we have even another new called rhesus compatibility, whereby, now there is a protein there that we call, the negative and the positive. It means there is one has a protein, the positive, the negative does not have a certain type of protein. So that's a different type of immunological condition. So that is basically how your body fights infection. Remember, we've spoken about body immunity. We have said immunity is the general defense of the body against foreign agents. We have said that some of the conditions that may lower your immunity, did I mention that? But we have a number of conditions that can lower your immunity, and those include debilitating conditions such as diabetes. We have chronic infections such as maybe TB. You have recurrent infections such as upper respiratory infections, because remember, the more you get the infection, the more your body fights it, and it's using its stores of defense agents, like the lymphocytes and the monocyte, the macrophages. So as it does that, it reaches a point where the quantity of those cells diminishes to a level that a subsequent infection not be fought effectively. So then we have other conditions, like other causes, like drugs that we may buy, especially over the counter, or use for a long time for one reason or another. Good enough is the drugs we use in cancer. Unfortunately, cancer is serious, and then we give you, drugs, those what we call cytotoxic drugs, and it's just serious again. So those what we call chemotherapy, the use of pharmaceutical drugs to kill cancer cells. Those pharmaceutical drugs, some of them, they are very, very, very toxic. Actually, all of them, they are toxic. The toxicity varies. Other drugs such as chloramphenicol, which is a common antibiotic, if misused, it can suppress your bone marrow and it can lead to low immunity. We have, other things like malnutrition. If you don't get the right diet, you end up with no immunity. That's why we encourage people to have a balanced diet. Most people avoid fruit and vegetable. They eat it as leisure. Fruit and vegetable should be part of your diet. Okay? Then we have even other disease conditions, including autoimmune disorders that may really knock down your immunity. And don't forget about cancers. I hope I mentioned them. Cancers is a big problem at the moment. It's a really big problem. And of course, we'll never forget talking about HIV/AIDS. Generally disease conditions that they are known to cause low immunity. Especially HIV/AIDS is of great importance because it works on your T cells. Remember how T cells support B cells, and it's the source of T helper cells. And then you have even the both systems, that is humoral and cell-mediated immunity, all being assisted by the T cells. So that's very important. So that's what we have discussed. We've also looked at the types of immunological responses and the types of immunity. Thank you. God bless you. meet again on other videos.